My name is Ayize Jama-Everett. I am an associate professor at Starr King School for the Ministry. I have been teaching a class called The Sacred and the Substance for dang near 2 decades off and on at Starr King, and it's been an absolute pleasure to teach all the time. I've got a variety of different students where we look at the role of medicine, plant medicine in different cultures and different societies throughout the ages. That class has taken on new dimensions and new forms with the decriminalized movements and the legalization movements around the United States from 2004 or 5 when I first started till today. And so that class has changed in dimension to meet and respond to the times. One of the best parts of this class has always been the guest speakers that we've had come in and speak to students about where they are in terms of the use of plant medicine, psychedelics, entheogens. We'll get into those distinctions later. And Starr King was very kind this year to allow a lecture series where we get to share some of those prominent lecturers and speakers with the community as a whole. So welcome to Starr King School of the Ministries, Psychedelics, and the Seminary series. This is our third. We've got one more, which will happen July 29th. I'll mention that again at the end of this. But thus far, we've had Brian Marascu, author of The Immortality Key. We've had Marianne Eddowes, who is a practitioner of plant medicine out of Peru. Both of those talks are available on YouTube. You can find them. Today, we have two absolutely amazing individuals I'm so happy to present to you, Hunt Priest and Zach. Zach, I always pronounce your last name wrong.
It's okay. It's like Kamenetz.
Zach Kamenetz. Perfect. I'm going to do the thing where I let them introduce themselves. But what I'd ask you to is to maybe share with the audience some of your religious background, and then also how you came to psychedelics or entheogens, however you prefer to describe it. And maybe we'll start with Zach.
Okay, sure. So my name is Rabbi Zach Kamenetz. I am currently the founder and CEO of Shefa, which means flow or abundance in Hebrew. Shefa is Jewish psychedelic support, and we can talk more about that this evening. I'm originally from Southern California, and we moved to Greensboro, North Carolina before high school. So I feel like I understand a lot about at least these two coastal states, but certainly about being raised in a very multicultural city in California, and then suddenly learning about Blackness and whiteness very quickly in Greensboro, and not knowing where a nice Jewish boy belongs in that mix. I was not raised religious explicitly. We were cultural, but I guess secular. We went to synagogue every now and then, but there was no talk about the spirit or Shabbat or observance or one's obligation to the mitzvot, to commandments in any way. And when I was 15, I went on a free trip to Israel for 2 months. And I guess I had there a religious awakening that was unrehearsed and completely unannounced. And I had a major turn. Like basically at the next falafel stand, I bought my first yarmulke. You love this story, Hunt, all right? But it's true. And I started trying to understand, what does it mean to keep Shabbat, the Sabbath? What does it mean to keep kosher? And so in a mixed family of a non-Jewish stepfather and a culturally Jewish mother, it was a little bit of a shock. But 15 years later, became a rabbi, now a rabbi and a nonprofit manager, I guess. And applying the things that I have learned over time as a Jewish educator, a rabbi, community leader, to the world of integrating a Abrahamic faith into psychedelic spirituality and consciousness. And I'm only sitting where I am because of people like Hunt and Ayize, just either being there or actively partnering, and knowing that there are really good people here in this space that I can rely on and learn from.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, Zach, God, there's a new facet of Zach every time I'm talking to him or on a call with him, but I love it. So my name is Hunt Priest, and it's always a little confusing because my last name is the same as my job, but that actually is my last name. And I'm an Episcopal priest. I was ordained mid-career. I had worked in worked in advertising and worked for Delta Airlines earlier, but I went to seminary in my mid-30s and grew up in a Christian home in a small town in Kentucky, and was fairly active in church most of my life. I mean, like a lot of people, in and out in my 20s, but kind of locked in my 30s and discerned a call to the priesthood, and went to seminary, and then served congregations in Austin, and then Atlanta and Seattle, and then Savannah, Georgia, which is where I live. My wife and I and our just recently graduated college-age son live. 6 years ago, I was a part of a research study. So my entree into psychedelics was through a research study of religious professionals. Zach was in that study as well, and had a profound experience of the Holy Spirit in Christian language, but profound. And the bit from Paul that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit was something I'd heard and sort of thought, okay, well, that's whatever, that makes sense. But it happened to me. And so I had a very real and embodied experience of God in my body. And that was 6 years ago, and I knew it would change my ministry. I didn't know how, so I kept doing my work as a priest in a parish, and it definitely impacted the way I understood my work and my preaching, and my sense of healing was completely different after that experience, because I was healed of pretty severe anxiety, which I wasn't even, that wasn't the study, but that was part of it. So about a year now, I left parish ministry, took a break from parish ministry to form a nonprofit. It's called Ligare, which is Latin for unite, to bind. It's the root word of ligament and also the root word of religion. In the religious context, to bind the human and the divine would be one way to think about it. So it works. Ligare.org was available, so that was a sign from the gods. So that's what we're called. And we're incorporated about a year ago, and we exist for education, networking, and eventually, we hope, making available safe and legal retreat experiences for people in a Christian context. So in the contemplative Christian tradition, a 4 or 5 day retreat would be my goal with this, and people would come and do usual retreat things that people do on Christian retreats. And then about midway through, they would have an experience of psilocybin, and then would begin to integrate that and then have support to continue that work. So that's the long-term vision, but right now we're working to educate and advocate when we can for legal and safe use of these sacred plants, sacred compounds. So in some ways we're just beginning and picking up on a lot of good science and a lot of good work that's been going on for 60 years, plus all that's happened for thousands of years in indigenous communities. So we're grateful to all of that, and just trying to find our way in this to bring healing to a culture and a world that's desperate for healing, and spiritual healing and psychological healing, both. So thanks.
This is going to be awesome. I'm in this privileged position where I get to ask these two great gents some questions. Those of you that have questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer section, and I'm going to hit as many as possible. I promise that I will. I guess the question that I have for both of you to start with is, it's one thing to have an experience, right? Even an experience with the divine. It's another thing to advocate for that experience for others. And I guess I'm wondering, given the headwinds that, psychedelics are facing in terms of legalization and dosage and, proper fit and all of those things, what motivated both of you to start nonprofits specifically to advocate for their use?
But I'll take that first because I got so excited to hear Hunt. I forgot the second part of the opening questions about my interests. So yes, I was part of this this clinical survey or clinical study, just like Hunt. My experience was a little different. My first time there, I had a powerful, full, colorful 6 hours on the couch. Certainly very narrative based, a lot about my family. We had gone through a good amount of stress and trauma around infertility. And it was only 3 months later that I was having my first psilocybin experience, and a profound amount of gratitude and opening and release in that space. There was also a powerful image or a moment of experiencing in the Jewish mystical tradition of different poles of existence. It's the Syphirotic Tree. And on one end is chesed, magnanimity, compassion, abundance. And on the other side is din, strictness, strength, constriction, boundaries, as part of a large oak tree, like we might see in our community. And I saw energy coursing back and forth through between chesed and din. And of course, I've read about chesed and din for I don't know how many years already, but actually to see it before me in balance with each other. And it was a powerful teaching and expression of something that was actually happening in my real life, and seeing that I had not purposefully or skillfully moved the energy between these two poles. I was actually stuck in one place, and that the mushroom or psilocybin or the divine was actually teaching me that things needed to be in balance, and only through my effort. But the second experience that I had was, it felt like being dropped into a submarine and the hatch closing, and there being no light, no sound, no relationship, no nothing. I'd like to describe it as just cosmic boredom. And I didn't know how to make sense of it. I didn't know what it meant. It had been at a higher dose. And so I thought I was going to get more fireworks, more color, more gratitude, and got really nothing. And that's exactly what I didn't know at the time, is that I encountered nothingness. And so having really no one to talk about this with, I felt like I didn't need to create an organization to be able to advocate for experiences, psychedelic or other experiences of expanded consciousness, but really a place for integration first and foremost. A place of community and connection where people could speak in a non-judgmental, vulnerable place about their previous experiences with psychedelics. And as Jews, a place that felt like it was for Jewish people and by Jewish people. That there are a number of ways in which Jewish spirituality is something that's hard to speak about, maybe in a general audience, maybe amongst Jews themselves. Spiritual bashfulness is what Abraham Joshua Heschel calls it. And that became really the center focus of Shefa. It was a place for people to be able to know that integration is a thing, and that we should be engaged in it. We should be telling our stories as maybe even the central tenet of Jewish spirituality, is the narrative. But in terms of experience, I feel like I am not prepared for that to even be ready. And I don't even think that Jewish theology or practice is ready to be able to advocate for people having Jewish psychedelic experiences because of my organization or my practice. We have a ton of foundational work to do to sort out, what is our tradition actually trying to teach us about having an experience that's as easy as swallowing a plant or a pill, versus the years and years of study and practice, relationships with teachers and communities of practice that can reach expanded consciousness through their study, or even naturally. So we're a ways away, but through integration, understanding our traditions, our traditions lineages about expanded consciousness, and in a communal context, I think then we'll only be ready then and not before. I want to be really careful and safe about this.
That's great. God, one of the gifts of all this is the ongoing dialogue that Zach and I are having, and that Ayize and I've had. And one of my hopes for all of it is that we are able to share like this, because Zach's perspective, the Jewish perspective, is different for lots. I mean, in the Christian tradition, at least in the U.S., there's a Puritan. I mean, how do I want to say this? It was very difficult to find Christians to be in the study that we were in, and it wasn't so difficult to find. It was hard, and it was difficult to find rabbis who had not done psychedelics. So, I mean, so there's that difference to begin with, and so I think that's why our focuses are a little bit different. I'm really dragging a ball up a Christian hill to get people to even be okay with it. I think, or even to talk about it. It's easier now than it was a few years ago. So the reason I started my nonprofit is really for education, because I think there is such a resistance in kind of mainstream American Christian culture about drugs in general, except alcohol. I mean, but I think there's education work that has to be done for all of us, but I think that's in the Christian community, that's one. As I said earlier, such a profound religious and spiritual experience, the type of experience that I've been trying in my work as a parish priest to have other people connect with. I had not anything quite that big, but I'd had mystical experiences in my life, in church and in nature and at the birth of my son, and I mean, multiple. And I had them in liturgy, and I really spent a lot of time and energy with liturgy to help people make that connection. And it's very difficult. And for me, the psychedelic experience was a reliable tool for occasioning these experiences. So Zach's right. We do need to move slowly. We need to make sure it's hugely important to make sure people are safe. We need to get our theology and our spirituality lined up so that we're not just going after an experience, but we're going after an experience that can then transform us as human beings. And so the rush to get this out there like this is we need to be really careful. So my hope is to educate people, educate myself, educate by having conversations like this, staying in touch with the science, staying in touch with the mental health, and staying in touch with my own Christian spirituality, and to encourage others to connect to their own spirituality, Jewish, Christian, whatever it is. So, but grounding it in spiritual practice, I think, to me, is the most important thing, and the thing that we actually are pretty good at talking about and occasionally making happen for people. So we have this tradition, both of us do. Both of our traditions have these gifts and these tools, and I think over time they will come to bear and be fruitful for people seeking mystical experiences through entheogens or psychedelics. So.
Thank you so much for that, Hunt. And Zach, thank you for talking about a non-glorious psychedelic experience. I feel like we're in this position these days where there's almost a sale of the experience, right? That they're advocates. So I always tell people, I'm not an advocate for psychedelics. I'm not an advocate for entheogens. I don't think everybody should be doing it. It's probably not the best for a fair amount of people. And yet for some people, it's really profound. But I think having a balanced view of both, like, hey, here's the really great things that can happen, and here's some things that are, like you said, cosmically boring, right? And then there's things that are like actually pretty negative, gives people a better sense of what could sort of what could happen and their engagement. You know, Zach, we have a mutual friend, I think, Sam Shankoff, and Sam wrote this excellent article in the form of a question, and I'm going to pose it to both of you, which is, what can religion teach psychedelics? I'll expand on that just a little bit, in that, you know, I think a lot of folks are going to psychedelics to have a mystical experience. As Zach was sort of commenting on, you know, for a lot of people, a mystical experience sometimes takes training, sometimes takes years of discipline. You know, there are spontaneous ones as well, but no matter what, theologies often have been crafted around mystical experiences, or been crafted to give those mystical experiences context. The largest demographic of religious identifiers in the US now is spiritual but not religious. Oops, so sorry about that. So I'm wondering, for all these spiritual but not religious folks who are hanging out, like what can religion teach them about their psychedelic journey? Either
First, yeah.
Let me see. I'll start.
Yeah.
I mean, I think maybe in some ways it goes back to the name of my organization, Ligare, which is, like, as I mentioned, the root word of religion and ligament. And religion at its best, at its most meaningful and effective and most beautiful, is what binds us back to God, to the source, to whatever the language you want to use, but it binds us back to where we came from and to each other. And I think that at its best, and I wish that's how we saw religion. Religion has such a terrible name, in many cases, rightly so, especially, I think Christians, I think the church has a lot of blood on its hands, and certainly has a lot of blood on its hands, and has done a lot of terrible things in the name of religion, in the name of God or Jesus. And I think we have to come to terms with that. People have drifted away from organized religion because they're not, I think, not having actual experiences of God. And so we should be like, we should and need to take that seriously. I think that, and we've used religion in this country for very political gains, and it's tainted and it's ugly. And yet I think both the traditions that we're a part of and that we represent have such beauty and such depth to their understanding of things we can't really explain, where science can't quite get there. And so I love being in dialogue with science. I wish science were more in dialogue with us, and psychedelics are kind of forcing that, because people are actually having religious experiences. So the science community has to deal with that. So I hope we can have a dialogue. I think one of the things I think about Scripture is that so many of the stories in all of Scripture are an attempt to explain an inexplicable, unexplainable mystical experience, an experience of God. And so stories are told to try to explain something that an experience people have had. I think of the resurrection experience, the resurrection stories of Jesus are an attempt to explain something that is almost impossible to explain. So these religions have containers, we have narrative, we have practice. If you could get rid of if you could just eliminate or try to, for us to come to terms with the damage we've done, and then for the others to forgive us and learn from us, not necessarily to convert to Christianity or Judaism, but to learn from us. And because we do understand mystical experiences. And I think that's what we bring. I think we bring thousands of years of practice and community and attempts to try to make sense of these things that are impossible to make sense of. So thanks. I'm not sure that answered the question, but thanks.
Yeah, I might say something similarly, but in a different way. I don't want to speak about psychedelics broadly, because they're, of course, used in so many different contexts, and there are sacred and indigenous and longstanding traditions. So maybe just to talk about how we focus or narrow, psychedelics in general or popular culture, as we are seeing. If you can see it on Forbes.com, then maybe that's what we're focusing on and talking about, or at least, I'll talk about. I think it is about potentially psychedelic communities or psychedelically influenced individuals for the past 60 or 70 years, and how that culture and how the imagery or the norms that have grown around these communities and their places of cultural influence have experienced what I think is talked about in in theology is antinomianism, the breaking of boundaries and the breaking of norms, or crossing boundaries or norms for the purpose of connection, for the purpose of experience. And I, at least from my own tradition, that there is a balance between, in expanded states of consciousness or mystical awareness or mystical contemplation, that Jewish mysticism and its antinomian trends have always been couched in nomian terms, meaning any practitioner, Abraham Abu Lafia, who would chant various permutations of the name of God with different vowel sounds and different letters over and over again until he could see an image of his body from across the room and actually begin to talk with it. He then would probably wake up the next morning and put on his tefillin, put on his prayer shawl. He would keep kosher. He would not break himself away from normative Jewish tradition. And so I think that if psychedelics are being introduced into general culture in a different way, where people feel like they are blasting out from American culture or their ethnic culture, religious culture, we have had probably 2,000 years of R&D, at least Judaism has, maybe more, to know that those insights or those images or those encounters, they stay with us. They mean something. They create, from the chaos we get cosmos, from a life of practice. And I think Hunt is pointing to that. Is that the only reason that I think maybe a Jewish mystic becomes a Jewish mystic and travels into that dream space is so that those mystical ideas, or chesed and deen, they continue to live out in my everyday life of taking out the garbage or being with my spouse and my children, or the way that I do payroll, or the way that I do or don't reply to an email, right? All of those things continue to live in these very bite-sized pieces. And that is something that I am hoping not only that religion can bring to psychedelics, but that even in the Jewish psychedelic culture, that we can actually begin to reopen our books. We can begin to open up our prayer shawl bags again, and to know what a life of practice can mean as we are venturing out into these far out places.
I love talking to you guys. Freaking love it. Folks, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A. I'm gonna keep giving mine, but in a few, I'm gonna go to yours. Both of you are reminding me of something that I've seen doing journey work with folks, which is that if someone has a discipline, and I don't really care what the discipline is, if it's martial arts, if it's meditation, if it's regular prayer, when a journey becomes difficult or upsetting, they have something to fall back on, right? They have something that they can rely on, and it helps them through that journey. Whereas folks who have a hard time with any sort of regular discipline, there's no context for that struggle. And so they're learning not only about whatever the medicine is revealing, but they're also learning how to deal with hard times at the same time. So it's a double bind for them. So I'm really hearing what you're saying. And in a new way, I'm hearing one of the roles of religion is to give this broader context for the individual who's taken those rituals and those behaviors in, not as pro forma, or even if it is pro forma, as something that can have new meaning when having a major encounter with the divine. I want to switch over to some notions, and this is just my personal bailiwick, of culture. And I'll start with psychedelics, just because in my mind, psychedelics is a white culture, right? It comes out of 1960s, able-bodied white men able to travel the world, go to indigenous people's communities, find out what their particular medicines are, and bring them back for a state either of enjoyment or for mind expansion but sort of it's an extraction model, right? It doesn't take the entire context into account. Especially when talking in seminary, I talk about entheogens, the term meaning, from the divine within, and people utilizing everything from breath work to toad venom to, synthetic compounds to connect to the divine within. And I guess I'm wondering if do you find that distinction arbitrary? Is it necessary? Am I doing too much? Like, is it spot on? Just wondering what you were thinking about that.
Well, certainly spot on about white culture, capitalism, and psychedelics as we've known it in North America since the 1950s. Even the word, obviously, probably you've gone in this course, the history of what we call these things, psychomimetics, et cetera. And so, can we brand this in a way that is in line with our values? Right, such a rich question. And I also wonder if the words that we use are in some ways already the beginning of an intervention about the expectations that people have when they encounter these compounds and medicines, right? So, okay, our assumption is, I'll do a little bit of Talmudic inference. If I say that an entheogen is, psychedelic is an entheogen, that means that there is something that is the divine within. But what about the divine without? So I'm already tipping the scale toward somebody feeling like, oh, there is a divine within, and I'm going to encounter that divine when I am in contact with this substance. Well, geez, that really sets a very high bar. I mean, that I contended with that just in the way that we talk about our organization. Originally, it was Shefa, and the tagline was connect with divine flow. What if you don't connect with divine flow? You did something wrong, right? The journeyer did something wrong, or bad set and setting, or you probably didn't prepare enough, or you didn't do enough integration. Oi, that is way too much pressure. So then we just changed it to Jewish psychedelic support. That actually says what it is. And so myself, yes, I have a theology that the divine is located somewhere within me, or that I'm an embodied being, and so therefore I only perceive the divine through my embodiedness. But that already sets up, like I'll say it again and close with it, a particular idea of theology, probably panentheism or panentheism, that someone else might not share. And if I am trying to embrace what I would call a radical psychedelic pluralistic model, then I need to probably hold back on the way that I'm describing the effects and what they're even called then, if we're getting down to just a word, because that might influence how someone else feels. And maybe you might say, well, isn't that the role of the clergy? Isn't that the role of the guide to help influence the outcome? I think you alluded to it already, like we're already starting to see how that is a slippery slope. And in this period of caution about how I talk about my work, I prefer to just say compounds, plants, fungi, because anything else is already stacking the deck.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's so good. I'm not sure I have anything else actually to add to that, because words fail. I mean, words never quite say what we need them to or want them to, and I mean, sometimes even the word Christian is so loaded, and sometimes I think, oh my God, I just don't think I look at the realm of Christianity, I think that word does not work for me anymore. So, and yet it does. It's so, we're stuck with it, and we're stuck with them. And maybe we do need to, as I think Zach's alluding to, not be so worried about the specific words, and maybe sacred plants or sacred fungi is the way we need to just go with it, and So, I mean, people say sacrament. I mean, people say sacrament. That's more of a Christian word, I think, but people say sacrament. So I don't know. Maybe that's where we end up. But so,
teachers, medicine, all of this thing, it's intending the outcome.
Right.
You're going to learn something, you're going to be healed. So either you can choose something and say, yes, this will heal you. Yes, this will teach you something. But then just to know that that's what you're setting up.
Yeah. Sorry, go for it.
No, I'm just going to say, and medicine presupposes there's a problem or something that needs, and I hope for a lot of us down the road when this is available, people are coming at it also to have an expanded spiritual life beyond what they're able to do. So there's no problem. It's just growth. So medicine presupposes a medical problem or a mental health problem.
I mean, but at the same time, I could say, and someone just asked Elizabeth Becker about pathologizing. We have a very low bar in Jewish thought for what constitutes a trauma. In our terminology, if you put your hand into your pocket and expect to pull out $1 and you only pull out 99 cents, that constitutes a trauma, right? An unmet expectation. Even one, I mean, that might be significant for some people, right? The fact that you are not able to buy what you were hoping to. Certainly me growing up, and maybe other people as well here. But that is enough to say I living in the world as a human in a body is being born into trauma. Mm-hmm. And therefore maybe that is medicine. And maybe we can then talk about that, right? As religion as an answer to the question of being alive, the question of being alive in trauma. Possible.
I love this conversation. I've got a priest who doesn't know if Christian is enough, and I've got a rabbi who doesn't want to focus on language, which is great, right? And I want to push back a little bit, right? And I want to go back to my original point. When I talk to Black people about utilizing these compounds, I can't talk about psychedelics because the first thing that comes out of their mouth is like, that's white boy shit. So that word is coded already. Absolutely. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely. So like to have it as a default doesn't necessarily work for me, right? And I understand the entheogen, right, has some presuppositions, but I believe all words have some presuppositions in them. And so I think it is about skillful use of it, right? Even when we talk about medicine, right? Reading stuff, the poetry of Marina Sabina, who Gordon Wasson went and took her mushrooms, and a whole nother story. We'll talk about that later. But, what she said was that we didn't use mushrooms, and this is from the Mazatec tradition in Mexico. So like, we didn't use mushrooms to see God. We use mushrooms to heal people. Well, what's a healing? The healing is if your family is sick, your child is sick, and you don't know if they're going to be better. You need to be healed from that, right? If you don't know if you're, you don't know if the crops are going to come in next year, and you need healing for that, right? This notion of what medicine is, right, is far more expanded in a world where you grow and produce everything for yourself, right? For your community, right? That your medicine is not dissimilar from your food. Not dissimilar from your relationships, not dissimilar from your experience in nature, right? That a bath can be medicine, that sitting with an elder can be medicine, right? So I think what happens in this rush towards the medicalization in the US is that we've conflated meanings on the word medical, and I don't know if we're always talking about the same thing,
Yeah. I'm also in that same way then, starting to talk about Torah as medicine, right? That then, therefore, if we're actually going to talk about material things having the medicine that you are talking about, right? A dispute between neighbors about where's the border between our two pieces of land, right? And we need medicine to be able to resolve that dispute, right? That is the basis of the oral Torah, everything that you're talking about. And therefore then, right, we have the plant medicine and the Torah medicine working in unison for not only the individual, the family, the neighbor, and see healing then as a collective enterprise. I think maybe just to strengthen your point, it's not only the individual to be healed, it is the community, it is the neighborhood, it is the world. And therefore, right, then in some ways, I feel like we're completely countercultural to the medical model. And I feel really, really comfortable there.
Well, then, okay, so then let's throw some more medicine on here, because I have to point this out. Call it entheogenic, call it psychedelic, but like, we're three men sitting here speaking, having this conversation, and I like the lack of the feminine voice, feminine power in the psychedelic community as a whole is astounding, right? Especially when you think about going into mental health, which is predominantly a women-centered field, right? Right. I'm thinking about all the female religious leaders that I haven't seen on, I won't mention the names, but like this panel and that board talking about psychedelics. And I'm assuming you identify as men. If not, please forgive me. But do you have any thoughts about that in terms of, the broader sexism, your own issues in terms of like not seeing women around? Like, I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. And I think we're here because, I think we're at this place because it has been mostly a white dude enterprise. And I think because privilege, because just the way that white dudes are not so worried about getting arrested, just as a purely simple fact as women would be, or as people of color would be. And so there's just privilege that has gotten us to this point, and the researchers are predominantly men. And so that's where we are. And I think Zach and I both are, at least in our own communities, doing everything we can to find the women, my board, I have 2 men and 2 women on the board. Just as a simple thing, like that is such a priority for me. And it's, and making sure that every time we have a panel, there are women. It's just, and Zach and I, except this one. But here we're the 2 people that are leading these organizations. And as soon as I can, it's gonna look different. But right now it's me. So, and I'm committed to as much diversity of viewpoints and experiences we can find. And we have to start somewhere, and we have to hold each other accountable. It has to come up every time we meet, and we have to be uncomfortable about it. And we have to fix it. and that's, yeah. So, yeah, it's all true.
Yeah. I know from the Christian tradition, for those of you that haven't read Brian Maroscu's Immortality Key, one of the great things that it points out is that, from Eleusis to early proto-Christianity, the medicine holders in the community were women who worked the land, right? So especially in Christianity, it's fascinating that in this latest iteration, there is no female sort of pronounced presence. I wonder, in Judaism, is the role similar? Is there a different role in terms of women when it comes to the mystical? I'm curious.
Well, no doubt that, we have one of our challenges is that, the literature that is produced, right? The academies as far back as Babylonia and Palestinian Talmuds, if not the traditions before them, are mainly completely populated by men, and textual tradition is seen as a masculine affair, or a male affair rather. And so there are women that are present, sometimes are miracle workers and the people who can best the rabbis in their argumentation. There are women that exist as characters being written by men in mystical narratives. But we have to go beyond textuality to imagine and assume that women are holding those same positions as not only the people who are keeping the house, but also managing the businesses, who are doing the skilled labor as well, not only agricultural, but everything else in cosmopolitan life, and that they themselves are healers. Absolutely. Not restricted to the male sphere. And we have right now, I would say that there are at least 10 women that I can think of in that are Jewish in origin, that are acting as guides in plant medicine, as Jews, really bringing their tradition together with blending it with shamanic traditions, but also women who are holding space in ultra-Orthodox ayahuasca circles in Israel. Right, that is happening. And so the question is really like, well, why don't they start organizations? If maybe there's, I don't want to, nothing essential here, but right, they're community focused and based in actually being with people and being with medicine. And I felt a calling to gather those people. So, at some point you could have a panel of those people versus people who have started organizations. Yeah.
Thank you. I know those questions can be awkward and weird, but I think it's always important to look at who's not in the room, as representing people who are often not in the room. Myself, I think it's a good practice that I think we all need to get into. I want folks who are contributing in the chat, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I'm happy to ask them. I want to start. Steve Gelberg asked, it appears that, and if I screw up your question, please forgive me, my light just went out. It appears that overwhelmingly young people who find religion in psychedelics find themselves drawn to Hindu, Buddhist, and other Eastern spiritual traditions, rather than moving back to their Christian and Jewish familiar roots. Why do you think that is? Is there something about the psychedelic experience itself, if one can speak on such a thing, that favors Eastern perspectives?
Well, this is my bailiwick, but so I won't talk that much. I'm a constructivist when it comes to this. I believe that people like Wasson and others, certainly the perennialist school, people who were experimenting with these chemicals and compounds in the 50s, who were also raised as white male Christians and were trying to unburden themselves from their own traditions, gravitated towards traditions that were beyond law, beyond the death of Savior, beyond the redemption of the world, and found that in Eastern traditions, either anglicized Hinduism or Americanized Buddhism, and I think set up a mimetic culture to equate the psychedelic experience with very narrow interpretations of Eastern tradition, right? Certainly not the more colorful kirtanic experiences of the beloved, and either being not in union with the beloved, but being attached in relationship to the beloved, and therefore that has continued in some very explicit and non-explicit, but certainly insidious ways, that when I hear people talk about psychedelics, often they use non-dual as the way of talking about it. Right? Non-duality is one theology among many, and I also think that in some ways that does violence to traditions such as mine, that does not always prefer the non-dual, does not always prefer the dissolution of the ego or the self, but is putting the practitioner in capital R relationship with the other, if that is the beyond other, or the inner other, or the neighbor other, or the spouse other, or the food other. And I think focusing on the dissolution of the ego really means that these relationships are not as significant as just me disappearing, right? That would be the best thing that could happen, is if I wasn't here. And maybe I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, but I feel this very strongly. And I also think that, at least for my tradition, my traditions that I'm representing today, that these things actually then downplay or make less Jewish spirituality, Jewish tradition, especially those that are more orthodox in their orientation to practicing Jewish law.
Zach, I'm gonna quote you. I gotta speak in Europa next week. In a few weeks, I gotta quote you. I've been saying this forever. Like I understand. I think ego dissolution for an able-bodied white male in the 50s whose entire country is like conformed so that he does well, I think ego dissolution is a great thing. But no woman who has ever navigated a freaking business environment in the US needs ego dissolution. No child that has ever navigated public school in the United States needs any more ego dissolution. And I think what happens in the psychedelic movement, and this is why I have some issues with it, is that it's replicated some of those 50s and 60s hippie sort of values and promoted them as that's what it means to do psychedelics. And
really,
I've done my fair amount, and you know what? I haven't had those experiences, and I don't think I'm doing something wrong. And I don't think the people that have done those things are doing something wrong. I think we can have different experiences, and they can be different psychedelic experiences.
So maybe sorry, I don't want to cut you off. No. And just maybe going back to that question then, right? That we're dealing with traditions, we're dealing with theologies, we're dealing with lineages, right? The multiplicity of the faces of the divine, right? 70, if not more, faces of the divine means that we have to represent the diversity of the psychedelic experience. And if we continue to repeat these memes, right, then people will either be swayed toward wanting to have that experience and only that one. And if they don't, self-blame, right, self-disregard, especially in like the clinical setting, we could talk about at some point. And that's just not gonna happen through me. And I know that's not gonna happen through Hunt.
No, Hunt's quiet. He agrees with all of this.
Well, as a white dude in his 50s who's been, I mean, I think that's exactly, just back to the point about ego dissolution or whatever the hot topic that people want to talk about with psychedelics, this multiplicity of experiences, and we bring ourselves to it, and we bring our lineages, our traditions, our trauma, our joy, we bring all that. And so my experience is going to be different than Zach's and different as Ayize's, and that we should celebrate that. And all of it should be celebrated. And just kind of circle back around to so yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. And I think to circle back around to the kind of one of the nubs of the question was, why are people going east, or instead of finding that in the Christian tradition, or I'll speak to that. I think some of the same issues in the Jewish tradition probably, but it's because the church did a terrible job of maintaining and explaining and teaching its own mystical tradition. And it frankly took competition from the East to wake up the church in the 50s, Thomas Merton and others, to the tradition that the monasteries and convents have been holding since the 4th or 5th century. We went all up in here. We got all up in here and forgot that a huge part of the Christian tradition or the Jewish tradition is mysticism. And in my own experience in my 20s, I was going to church, and I was committed, but something was missing. And I wanted to find a Buddhist. I wanted to find whatever the Buddhist tradition had that seemed to be missing in my own Christian tradition. And then I read Thich Nhat Hanh's Living Buddha, Living Christ. And he sent me right back to the church. And I think to find the traditions that are in the mystical and the contemplative that's in our own, we've got it. We just haven't lifted it up. And so people don't know that we have it. And people are free, obviously, to find their own path. But these two old, wonderful traditions have a lot that's not been mined. And so I think and so there's that. But I think the bigger point with this discussion is we can't narrow it. We've got to expand it every chance we get and value every experience. And I learned from your experience and Zach's experience. And that's why the communal is more important than the individual. But to have this experience in community, religious community, I would hope, gives us everybody else's experiences too. So I don't know. That's where I think it's where it's got to be.
This is when I know we should have made these longer. We'll make them longer next time, I promise.
This doesn't have to be the last time we talk. You could just come over.
Please, just invite me. I'll be there.
I'll fly out from Savannah.
Great.
So Jennifer asked, how do you feel about language used in psychedelic research, such as mystical in the Mystical Experience Questionnaire or transcendent? Do you feel it is an appropriation of religious language?
Well, I think in these settings, if I'm correct, that they're actually trying to understand something about the nature of religious experience, and so are using the language, using at least English terminology from the academy, let's say, about how we talk about the phenomenology of religion. So that doesn't feel too off. I guess, again, getting back to the MEQ, I don't know if you've talked about the MEQ in your course. Yes, that's a yes.
No, that's we're going to do it later.
Oh, great. So, okay, you'll get there. And Sam, also bringing back to Sam Shankoff, who has some reservations about this questionnaire, is that it cannot represent, right? It is a criteria tool. It is a spreadsheet. It is a survey. It is a Google Doc. And how can you contain the myriad experience of human individuals touching the beyond within? So I think then what in some ways they created a tool that by definition limits the way that we understand the experience, because there was no question on the MEQ to talk about my cosmic boredom, which I now understanding in my integration, it was a profound mystical experience. It was a profound experience of the beyond, but not one that was accounted for in their questions. So how do we fully understand the fullness of human experience with regard to religious phenomenology? Well, I don't know. I'm not I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't design these things. So I wonder if we actually then need more culturally and religiously competent and respectful and specific research, so that we can understand the nature of Jewish experiences, understand the nature of Christian experiences, atheist experiences, versus just lumping everything together with, I think, this perennial, again, going back to the perennial sense that, we're all humans, or we're all spiritual beings just having a human experience, to actually honor our multiplicity.
Anything on that, Hunter? Should I move to the next question?
No, I'm happy to have religious language appropriated. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was wonderful. I think exactly spot on. So.
Anonymous attendee asked, if these experiences loosen the grounding of one's spiritual background, whether it's Christianity or Judaism, how would each of you consider speak and hold space for someone who no longer believes or wants to participate in said religion from the experience? Great question.
Great question. Hunt, you want to go? Have you had conversations with people like this?
I'm happy to talk to anybody, and I think honestly, I think that when I keep coming back to Christian spiritual practices, I think there's a way to, just like people use Buddhist practice, like I'll sort of use a Buddhist prayer, a meditation practice as a practicing Christian. I don't have ownership. I don't feel like I have the copyright on it. I feel like I'll have any discussion with anybody about a spiritual or religious matter, as long as it's respectful and open and we hear it. I mean, I'll talk all day about it. I want people to find their path. Mm-hmm. And I think I think so much of our problems in the world right now is a lack of spiritual grounding and spiritual connection and actual understanding of the religions beyond their own political, again, back to Christianity, but their own political use, and not the real power in them, which is immense. And we don't, so I'll talk, I'm not offended. I'll talk to anyone about it. And I relish those conversations because I can learn something. So yeah, bring it on.
Yeah.
What about you, Zach?
Well, I think, if we're, now we're in the role of pastoral counseling and pastoral care.
Right.
Then obviously, sacred, attuned listening to what is being shared, right? The thing about being a psychedelic chaplain doesn't mean that we're not throwing all of our tools and all of our teachings and all of our learning out the door, but going back to the fundamentals of what it means to be fully present for someone in the spirit, or within the heart of Torah, however we talk about it. But I would obviously be doing a lot of deep listening, but I also come to this work. I don't know if psychedelics as being a non-specific amplifier, to use Stan Grof's terminology. I don't totally really know what that exactly means, other than this idea that it is not the LSD, it is not the mescaline that creates the experience only, right? But it is a broad, complex relationship between the set and the setting and the substance, and many more things. And then I imagine that this was something that was not new to the person who had that experience. And I've spoken to many people who said, well, I just had my first mushroom journey and I've lost my emunah, right? I have lost my faith. Meaning that I no longer believe that there is a God in the world, or that God cares about me, or God cares about what I eat, or who I have sex with, or anything. It has disrupted something within me, and therefore, talking and understanding more closely about where they were before that experience has, in my limited experience, come to show that these things were already present. And that there weren't people there ahead of time to ask those questions, to do that kind of preparation, not just, you fill out a questionnaire before you go to your ayahuasca circle somewhere, but to do the pre-work, to understand where people are holding in their faith, where they're holding in their practice, and to mention the very real possibility that this might shake things up, right? This might actually catalyze things that they had thought about passively, or had been, wondering for a while, but hadn't made any action, right? That might make things very urgent and very concrete very quickly. And to be prepared for that. And are they willing to take that risk? And if they are willing to take that risk, what are they going to need on the other side to help support them, either put things back together or to find a new path? Right? That, I think, is psychedelic chaplaincy in this nascent period. That's psychedelic chaplaincy for me. And so want to be really, really careful, not just about the experience, but the before and after as part of this whole, because people don't, people come in and leave in very different ways, and we want to be present for those parts too.
I'm gonna keep asking. Oh, sorry.
Well, I also the preparation is just so important, and we don't even. I mean, as I say that, I think, well, what does it even look like? I don't know, but I mean, I have some ideas about it. But I was so fortunate where I was at 52 when I was in the study that I was had a job that encouraged me to develop my spiritual life, and gave me space for that, and which gave me the experience I had, which was big. And I think part of that, we bring everything, we bring our full selves to it. And I had the privilege of being able to do the work and beforehand. And so as much as we can help people prepare spiritually for a big spiritual experience, I think that's the sort of questions we need to be asking and finding the answers to and committing to, so people are safe and people at least have the potential to have some pretty life-changing experiences. I mean, again, we're in such a it's also new. And I just keep coming back to the tradition and the practice, and that's what I come back to. So
I'm asking questions just because there are so many, but each one of these we could spend hours on. James Clark says, many people seem to have anxiety about institutionalized religion and religious imagery because of their negative experiences with religious dogmatism or religious authorities. When considering setting, how do you approach such anxiety among potential entheogenic journeyers? I say this as an aspiring chaplain who aims to serve people in the punk, rock, and metal scenes, knowing that such people may feel allergic to religion at best and hostile to it at worst.
I feel like I need.
Yeah, you want to take that one, Zach? I mean,
Well, I feel like I need to have that question either posed again or.
Sure. So when considering setting, like, how do you deal with people who have religious trauma if they're potential entheogenic journeyers?
Meaning because you're putting them in a religiously oriented space
that they may encounter some religious.
They may encounter that, right? They may encounter that and are hostile to that. Right. There is a great video. Actually, I don't think I need to say too much about this. There is a fantastic video that was, I think, in 2015 or 2016 by Bob Jesse. Maybe Ayize, you can find it, put it in the chat. By Bob Jesse about the Reconstruction of Religion, based on the 2006 paper that he co-authored with Roland Griffiths about psilocybin occasioning a mystical experience. Really powerful. And I think part of the preparation work, again, is allowing people in the atheist, punk rock, death metal, hardcore, tripcore, whatever it is, to, thank you, Jeff, giving people an opportunity to empty their cup of those things, right? To acknowledge and empty the cup before they can fill it back up with something else. Right? To bank all of those feelings of abuse or hostility or alienation or being left out and having outsider status, all of the things that we carry with us because of our direct experience or the things that we just absorb from living in religious culture, and then making room for what is also beautiful. Right? There are things that are beautiful, even if we don't necessarily have an experience with them. Like I love stained glass. There you go, Reconstruction of Religion. I love stained glass. And I can love stained glass and I can love shape note singing. I love shape note singing a lot. And I also feel about Christianity as having devastated or aspects of Christianity or Christian culture or how Christianity was weaponized by colonial culture, whatever the way, as having devastated many of my lineages and millions of my people. so I can love things and hate things at the same time. And to bring the fullness of my experience to that space, I think is ultimately what can lead, if not to healing, but to more curiosity and more exploration of who I really am.
I got nothing. I don't have anything to add. That was beautiful, Zach. That really seriously brought a tear to my eye. Thank you. Beautiful.
Well,
the pain
I love
of
you, and being in this relationship with you is healing for me too. And
I mean, there's pain. The pain. Yeah. Yes. All that. Yeah.
Anonymous attendee writes, you both represent faith traditions that give ultimate authority to Holy Writ. How do you reconcile this with the self-authenticating power of unmediated mystical experience?
Well, let me jump.
Yeah.
I don't represent a Christian tradition that puts everything on the Holy Writ. I represent a tradition that puts a third of it on that, a third on the tradition, and a third on. And I think our experience has as much value as our tradition or as our holy written word. So, I mean, there are many Christianities, there's many manifestations of Christianity, and I'm grateful to be in one that is not so closed. And there are many that aren't. I mean, the Christianity that we see on the news is not the Christianity of my experience. And and yet I know exactly where the question's coming from. I think the psychedelic experience, as we move into this, is going to change how we understand our traditions. I mean, my example was of the Holy Spirit. It was kind of intellectualized, and then the Holy Spirit got on me and in me and moving through me, and now I understand that in a completely different way. So that's an experience. That's not, I mean, that's in scripture too a little bit. I mean, it's Pentecostal. It's a Pentecostal moment in the New Testament, but I actually experienced it. So now I get it in a new way that I wouldn't have before. So psychedelics opened that up for me.
Yeah, I also don't come from a tradition, and there is no tradition that I know other than Karaism, which is an offshoot of mainline rabbinic Judaism, but that we do not, sola scriptura is not the way that we live our Jewish lives, right? There is a tense and dynamic and beautiful interplay between scripture and even, trying to think in Hebrew and English at the same time, Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, rabbinic tradition, and my own direct experience. So you broke it up into thirds. I really like that, Hunt. I'm going to use that. But I think that maybe what you didn't mention in your question, Anonymous, is the role of prophecy and prophecy, and you said self-authenticating, right, the authority of direct experience, something right about that.
Self-authenticating power of unmediated mystical experience.
Whew, yeah. Right, we see that all the time, right? That Moses, in the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, right? Moses is giving directions about something, and people start prophesying, right? Two other people start prophesying in the camp, and Joshua's freaking out. And we're like, what do we do? What do we do? And Moses says, like, would that all of the people of Israel were prophets also, right? There's always this tension between the charismatic individual, not the way that we talk about charismatic individuals now, but right, people who are deeply connected and seem to in some ways be free from the nomian. And my question is, when people do start, and already have, but when people do start having something closer to what we would call the prophetic, how do we actually envelop that? How do we absorb the power of the prophetic into non-prophetic traditions? Scriptural tradition, textual traditions, or majoritarian traditions, right? That things are decided by the majority of the rabbis, right? And there's a minority opinion, but the majority say to do this way. What if someone says, I have had a powerful vision because of my whatever, And Shabbat is now on Wednesday. So that's really something that I want to take very seriously and don't have an answer to right now. Because I want to take people's experiences seriously and see them personally. But what if people start talking about their personal experience in global terms? That is going to be really crazy.
I won't call it crazy. I'll say that it'll be worthy of conversation.
Yeah. I would say crazy, not crazy as a
I know
apology, but it would be crazy to imagine what we would do about it.
Right. Sarah writes a question specifically for Hunt. How would you introduce / present a psychedelic Christian retreat center to folks? How could you frame such a thing to bring in at times very conservative people to open their hearts and minds to such an idea? The short answer is he's in process right now. That's what he's doing tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I would present it not much different than any other 5-day retreat that is a kind of a common model in Christian life, where you go away, there's a group of people, there's leaders, there's your needs, somebody cooks for you, and you have a comfortable place to be, often in a beautiful place, and you get away from the busyness of your life, and you prepare with prayer and scripture and liturgy and conversation and silence. And then on the third day, you have an experience with, let's say, example, psilocybin. And then the next couple of days, I think the thing that's going to be tough for some people is that in the middle of that, you've got this thing that they've been told that is illegal, and they've been told will kill you or make you insane. That if we can get people to see that that's not the case, and that people are actually having these expansive experiences, then I don't know why anybody. When I saw that study I was in, I thought, why would anybody not want to be in this, have this opportunity? And that was very clinical. I mean, to have an opportunity in a spiritual context, even better. Even better. So I would frame it like I frame other retreats, except there's a little special thing that happens on day 3 that didn't happen at other retreats. And then, and this is an important part. It's not for everybody, and not everybody has to do it. There are many people that do not need these plants to have an experience, a huge experience of God. There are lots of people that don't need that, and then people that shouldn't have it. So it's not a magic bullet. It's not a one size fits all. And that's where the discernment, back to the original part early in the conversation, it's about discernment, personal and communal discernment. Am I called to this? Are you called to this? Are we as a community called to this? No is fine. No is that's actually probably a better answer, because it's not a better answer, but it's a very viable and important answer to say, I'm not.
It's funny.
We've got to keep saying that, because it's already looking like this is the miracle cure for everything that ails us. And my experience was 6 years ago, and I'm still working on that. I'm still working on it. Yeah. Zach, I've heard it in what Zach said too. It's still deepening. So
I'm being reminded of I was fortunate to spend some time on Alice Coltrane's Ashram in Southern California before it burned, unfortunately. And she'd passed by the time, but they're still playing her tapes. And so it was a sermon that she was giving, and she said, she said, I built this ashram for people who need this ashram, but not everybody who's spiritual needs this ashram. She's like, this is only for those who need it. And don't assume that just because you need it, this is the only way that people can have their encounter with the divine. And I'm beginning to feel the same way about entheogens, right? Like, if this is a way for some people, great. It doesn't have to be the way for everyone. I think that rah, rah, rah model is going to get some folks in trouble. I promise I won't intervene anymore. I'm sorry. Questions? One more. Alexandra asks, curious about your thoughts on the possibility that the story of Moses and the burning bush is actually a Judeo-Christian account of an entheogenic experience.
there's another great video. I watch a lot of videos. This is what I do every day. Just watch YouTube to answer questions like this. Hamilton Morris on Joe Rogan, whatever. But he is asked this question by Rogan, and Hamilton approaches this like a scientist. He's like, "Oh, okay, so you're probably assuming like some open air position. You're assuming that the plant has some compound in it. How is it being extracted? Wait, so you're saying that it's combusted? So then there's also like burnt carbonization of plant matter. So how do you think that this person's actually going to get enough DMT to have this experience without dying of smoke inhalation first?" Right, so that is like one interpretation. Okay, fine, whatever. Okay. But with this example and many other examples, I'm really hesitant to read entheogens into my tradition, right? My Torah, only because for two reasons. The first is we do not have a continuous lineage of practice of these things, and so it feels slightly, forgive me, other people don't, but for me, slightly disingenuous to claim that we have any entheogenic history without strong material evidence of it beyond scripture. Because if you're going to take that seriously, whoo, I gotta tell you, you're going to have to take a bunch of other things really seriously and literally also. Are you willing to do that? And the second is that I think that what this does, what this reading is that materialist understanding of the sacred, that the sacred could only be made, be in contact through a plant, through a drug experience. And maybe this is the topic of the class, I don't know, in some way. And what it does, no, okay, forget it.
Well, not only,
in some way, is that we have many more testimonials to people having these powerful experiences as human beings, as Jews, without the help of a drug catalyst, without a plant catalyst. And I don't want to minimize it to my entire tradition being boiled down to a DMT trip. Because it also then affects the authority in some way of the Mosaic revelation, and Mosaic authority as the basis for rabbinic Judaism. I, in some ways, do wonder if it's actually an anti-Jewish reading of this. In some ways, like Luther, to undermine the authority of the revelation in order to prop up some other system. I have questions and concerns about that. And right, it's not a reading that is necessary nor sufficient to me. So how do we actually square that? It's very interesting. I think it's cool. If that's your thing, go with it, go for it. But for me, it doesn't meet the standard of an authoritative reading.
We're almost at the end, but Thomas Robert has asked this question, which I usually ask you all. He asked, how might clergy be prepared to lead entheogenic sessions? Who would qualify? And I guess my broader question is, in this psychedelic / entheogenic exploration, what role does the seminary play? Or what role does the yeshiva play, right?
Hunt, you want to take this?
I mean, I don't think this is necessarily something that, again, back to discernment, are my gifts match up to be somebody that leads people through a psychedelic journey? Maybe, maybe not. So there's discernment. I don't think it has to be clergy, but I think the role of the seminary, like it is on all these other matters, is education and formation and preparing. I would love to be able to give seminarians to make it available to seminarians for a legal experience. If that means leaving the country, whatever, so that they have some sense of it. And then, because this is happening, I've read in New York every weekend there's at least 100 ayahuasca circles, or 200, or I mean it's everywhere. And so I want the Jewish and Christian and other religious communities and leaders to be fully aware, because we have people in their congregations who are doing this safely or unsafely, and we have a responsibility to help them integrate it and learn from it. So education, and then discernment to see, are we called to it? And then if we're called to it, what do I need to know? What do I need to learn so that I can help people do that? And so this is such an exciting time and a scary time, as all exciting times are. They're scary. We're in a very fragile time in a way. And I'm mostly excited, and I've got a little fear and trembling about it too. So that's healthy. Yeah, I don't mean Zach.
I would just add from my perspective, either rabbinical schools or yeshivas, right? That like extracurricular Jewish learning that doesn't happen for the purpose of a rabbinic degree or ordination. People just learning for learning's sake. I think starting to use the language of decolonizing our theologies, that there is a strong Western rational tradition that crept certainly in Western Europe, but then also into Eastern European Judaisms, in order for Jews to become citizens of political states. And what that meant was either having their mystical traditions, their mystical theologies bred or beat out of them, and to become more comfortable with the numinous and the sacred. I think it's comforting to be able to read books like these, become conversant in their language, and there is a different experience of traveling to the center of my humanity, the middle of my heart, right, that burning ember of my soul, that we do not always get to learn about in yeshiva or in rabbinical school. And so then we have the opportunity to learn from our Sephardic siblings, our Ethiopian siblings, right? Other traditions where they were not made to or forced to give up some important part of their birthright, and then therefore, right, to learn more about those mystical traditions from people who have been maintaining them, not just the rabbinic class, but everyday people, men, women, children, non-gendered people, and that's I think what's on my curriculum now.
It's too short. This is absolutely too short. Thank you both so much for your time, for your energy, not just here, but outside of here, and all the work that you do. I owe you both a meal or 5. And
let's go.
You will be invited.
Ayize, you're so good at what you're so good at this.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. You're not really. Thank you. It's fun. And thank you. You hold the space.
Everybody who's come, thank you so much for being here. We're doing this for everyone, so we really appreciate it. I'm looking at the numbers, and this is like more people have stayed through the entire thing on this one than I think any other one, so that's definitely a good sign.
Don't tell Brian.
No, I won't tell him at all. I think it is April 19th. We will have our final one of these awesome and amazing psychedelics in the seminary panel, and it'll be great because 2 people who have actually graduated from Starr King School for the Ministry will be here to talk about their experiences in the entheogenic space. I hope you can all come back, learn from them, learn from all of us. Yes, if you want to put Hunt, if you want to put Ligare's email up there, website up there, please do. Thank you all so much, and excited to grow and learn with everyone. You're all great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Take
Blessings.
care, everyone.